Shogun episode 7 came out, and it was a pretty intense one. I'm really not sure where the show's going now. So there'll be spoilers. The highlights for this episode are obviously that Nagakado, Toranaga's son, dies. Buntaro threatens John and wants to behead him, but he ends up sparing him because of Mariko. And John gets pissed off and just says that he's leaving. And this is all after Toranaga gets betrayed by his brother. So there's a lot going on in this one. We start off with a little flashback from 46 years before the present day in the show. Toranaga has won his first battle. You can see his second in command with him, Horomatsu, which I actually thought was maybe Toranaga's brother or something. I couldn't tell who it was, but they talk about it later and you find out that's who it is. So Mizuguchi formally surrenders and he asks Toranaga to be his second. And the second is the person that cuts his head off while he slits his own belly. Pretty brutal. We see Toranaga swing the sword, and that's the intro. And I really like that this sets up this way, because a big part of this episode in particular is, would you rather know the truth, hear stories, or legends? Because there's a lot of glorification of war and heroics from the younger generation, where the older generation is much more subdued and kind of bitter about war and the realities that come with it. This one is called Chapter 7, A Stick of Time. And the Stick of Time, this one's referring to as an incense, so it's just a few minutes. The madam of the brothel or the tea house, whatever you want to call it, lowers her price if Toranaga will give her a stick of time. And they show the incense during their conversation. Google says that it's actually a colloquial thing for 5 minutes. I'm not sure if it's specifically 5 minutes or if it's just a phrase for saying, hey, can I get a minute? Toranaga is going to meet his brother, and his brother's kind of joking that he saw a decimated army after the earthquake, which is obviously Toranaga's. And they haven't seen each other in a long time, so it's kind of awkward, especially because Toranaga is really asking for a favor in return for military support. And you can see these little interactions with Buntaro where he's very clearly jealous of John, which is a pretty important part of the episode also later on. You can see his brother's like, wow, you tamed a barbarian. And John actually speaks a little bit of Japanese here to him. I don't know if he learned just this phrase or if he's just picking up on it throughout the course of the show. It seems like he's just slowly picking up phrases throughout the season, but he's being told to keep it under control and follow the rules and bow and just be proper because everyone's super on edge about this meeting. So they agree to have a night to hang out and get drunk, and then they'll talk about the negotiations tomorrow for what the brother wants in exchange for the army. And throughout the whole episode and really the whole season, Toranaga's son is like itching for a fight to the point where I've actually found him pretty annoying even before the thing with the cannons. And this episode, I feel like they just set out to make him even more obnoxious. So we cut and Toranaga's bitching about the amount that they have to pay Gin, who's the tea house owner, madam lady. And Mariko's like, well, she wanted a lot more, but she negotiated down since you accepted it to give her a stick of time. So that's where that phrase comes up. And obviously they have an important conversation partway through this episode because of this promise. And they're giving Kiku to Toranaga's brother for the week, which is why it's so expensive. John shows up and he's asking about his role. He's like, you keep giving me these gifts, but I'm not allowed to actually do anything. Like, you've given me a fief, you've given me a title, but you're still kind of treating me like shit. So he's being pretty disrespectful. And Toranaga's just like, I don't want to hear anything else about it. So you can tell John at this point in the story is getting really fed up with being here and essentially being held against his own will. And this conversation, Mariko says to him multiple times, like, you really need to let it go. Omi wants to see Kiku. And Gin is like, no, she's been bought out for the week. Tough shit. I can get you a different consort. And he's kind of bitching that he hasn't seen her since John stayed there. Gin, or Jin, openly says it seemed like his mind was elsewhere. So if she doesn't actually know, she's at the very least figured out what's going on between John and Mariko. So their relationship is becoming much more obvious to everyone around them. Hiromatsu shows up to Fuji's place without telling her, so she's completely unprepared and a little bit embarrassed. And he's like, oh, your house is so clean, though. Like, you're doing a good job. And he brings her the remains of her husband and son back from Osaka, since he promised that he would. And you can see she's pretty emotional about it, to the point where she says, after she's done her duty for Toranaga and John, she wants to die. And you can tell that Hiromatsu is really like, you need to live. Or like, why don't you want to live? And he's pretty upset about it, clearly, with the look on his face. So we go, and Nagakodo is talking to Yabushige, essentially being pretty brazen while they all hang out with Toranaga's brother who's in the hot spring. And he's saying, I hear that your first kill is better than your first woman. I hope Ishido sends everyone in Osaka to us. Like, he's really antsy to fight and kill people and super annoying. And Yabushige has a pretty good line here, actually, where he says, it depends on the woman. So they're having their kind of formal drinking night together. They're not supposed to be talking about negotiations. They're supposed to be just kind of hanging out and leaving it for tomorrow. And Toranaga's brother is telling stories about him, and they just gradually get more and more disrespectful. And one of the stories that he tells is that when Toranaga had to behead that guy as a kid, he did it in one swing, which sets up a really interesting conversation later between Toranaga and Hiromatsu, where we find out that it actually took 9. This is coming back to the thing about, do you prefer legends, stories, or the truth? Because obviously those are all very different things. And the next story that he tells is when Toranaga was taken hostage and his mom told him to be brave, that he shit in his pants and had to ride on a horse like that the entire way. And obviously at this point everybody stops laughing because it's openly disrespectful. And you kind of don't see what he's getting at, but you can see the tension just rising throughout the whole scene. And what you find out is that Toranaga's brother, Saiki, I'm sure I'm butchering it, already accepted the position of regent from Ishido, and now he has this area surrounded, so there's no escape for them. So he gives Toranaga the order to come to Osaka, allow himself to be impeached and executed, and his son, because of the attack with the cannons, is given an order to commit seppuku. And he's going to take it until Toranaga yells at him, because he's been doing this glorification of death and honor and killing just the whole time. And he talks about how beautiful it is, and it's just a really naive view for someone who wants glory, clearly. So Toranaga says he'll answer officially tomorrow by sunset. And this just kind of buys him a little bit of time, because it doesn't really seem like he has a plan or any options. At least not in this episode, it doesn't. So John asks Mariko what happens if he accepts his execution, and she says that he'll be killed, and then half of his men will commit seppuku to follow him. John's like, my boat is still in the cove. If you could get me some of Yubishige's men, and I could get to it, maybe I could fix it up. And she cuts him off and says, what? What will you do? And he's like, well, anything is standing better than here fucking off, essentially. So it seems like he just wants to run away, which, to be fair, it's kind of seemed like that since episode 1. So makes sense that he wouldn't just want to go fight to fight. So we go and see Toranaga like contemplating what he's going to do. He tries to flip what looks like a coin or something on top of this round thing and fails. And I guess this is just supposed to be like a metaphor for the delicate situation that he's in and essentially how precise he has to be to not screw it up. It's okay, it's just not much to the scene. Yabushige was still trying to play both sides of the fence through Ishido, and he gets Ishido's answer, which is obviously a head in a box. So now he's stuck with Toranaga, seemingly whether he likes it or not. John goes to the little harbor, and he sees a big boat, and it has Ishido's crest on it. And you can see he realizes that they're just screwed and kind of trapped on all sides. Toranaga's done his thinking. They're trying to see if they have any options to get messages out, and they pretty much don't because Saiki has everything surrounded. And his son is like, are we going to die with blood on our swords? Like, he wants to fight to the death. He's bent on it. And Toranaga says, why is it that only those who've never fought in battle are so eager to be in one? And obviously he's tired of his son's naive glorification of battle and war because he's experienced it his entire life. And this is a pretty common theme for war-related movies or whatever. Even Godzilla Minus One had a scene like this, where the young guy on the crew says something along the lines of, I wish the war had gone on longer so I could have been in it. And the main character gets pissed off at him. But I'm just glad Toranaga finally told him just to shut the hell up, because he's been annoying as shit for a while now. He doesn't learn the lesson though, and it doesn't do much good. But at least he said it. Here's where he talks to Gin, and you can see his stick of time burning. What she's asking for is essentially a place for consorts to age gracefully. They repeatedly comment on their lifestyle in the show, that they're raised for grace and beauty, but they're kind of like wilting flowers. Like once their age goes, they become irrelevant and just kind of thrown out in the streets. So she's wanting him to make a promise that even after his death, he'll set up the infrastructure for her to help these women live a full life and kind of be taken care of, or have options at least. So what she's asking for is essentially tea houses for the retired ones under his protection and some kind of guild for them. And his answer is pretty much like, I don't even have the option to consider future plans as big as yours right now with everything else going on around me. And she says that pretty much they're both the same, that their rough upbringing made them who they are. It made her ambitious and clever. She's the most successful lady in the area, just like his background made him clever and tough because he was a hostage, fought in wars, all that. And she says, "Why'd you leave your garrison so exposed? Anyone could have seen it. How could you make such a careless mistake?" And she apologizes because he's like, "Do you think any of this was my will?" So I can't tell if this was part of some plan that he had, or if his men just kind of ditched him and now he's stuck here and everyone thinks that he has a plan, but he doesn't. Because based on his decisions this episode, it seems like everyone thinks he has a plan, but then in the end, he agrees to go to Osaka. So it seems to me like he doesn't. Yabushige and his men are trying to get in the hot spring when Saiki's also are. And Yabushige says, "Well, I guess there's not enough room for both of us," and then just strips and gets in. And I can't tell if he's finally resigned to his death or if he just thinks that he'll escape again because he has multiple times already. Omi is talking to Nagakata, and he's still doing his "we need to fight, blah, blah, blah" kind of chest pounding. And Saiki overhears him, and he's like, "Spineless pigs, your words are as dull as your blade." And then he's talking about how hard it is for him because they're still family, even if he did make the decisions that he made. And Saiki says, "You should think about your legacy. You're going to die before you even get to start one because of your behavior." And again, he's talking about how beautiful death would be, and he just doesn't get it no matter how many times people say it to him. John's just kind of staring at the boats, and we see Buntaro look over and see him. And then Yabushige comes up, and he's training them in their swords. You can see John grips it one-handed at first because he's not used to a two-handed sword. And Yabushige just knocks it out of his hand over and over. And then Buntaro jumps in, and he wants to kill him, but he's holding back. And eventually he does leave. And Yabushige tells John that if he wasn't there, he'd be dead. I'm not really sure how to take that. I don't know if maybe he meant because Yabushige is a witness, or because him and Buntaro are similar standing that he couldn't kill him right in front of him. But either way, he says that he saved John's life. Fuji's training with her weapon, preparing to fight, and Nagakata comes up to her and essentially says that it'll be good to fight again, and that if he had been the one to stand up to Ishido, maybe her husband and son would be alive, because he would have had to kill himself. But he says he wasn't brave enough. And she pretty much just says we do what we can when we're able to. But she's obviously upset still. But yeah, just almost every single scene reinforces him wanting to fight and glorifying war. So if they wanted you to be unsympathetic when he dies at the end here, they did a good job. So Toranaga does his last will. He actually does give some land to Gin and Ito, even though he said he wasn't going to, for her idea of a tea house for retired consorts or courtesans. And Buntaro shows up saying he needs to talk to him and that he wants Mariko to stay. And he says that he wants to kill the barbarian before they all die because he's only trying to serve himself and because of how he looks at Mariko. Toranaga says, "Are you saying that she's reciprocated this? Because if so, you need to behead both immediately. Like, that'll be the ruling." And Buntaro looks upset and eventually gives in and says no. He apologizes for being petty and leaves. I think it's a really interesting scene because I think the show does a pretty good job of portraying an unhealthy relationship where he actually does love her. He's even acknowledged that Mariko has never liked him, that she seems a lot more receptive to the barbarian. Obviously, he's abused her, but he does care for her in his own very unhealthy way. I think the show did a good job making that feel realistic. And it's also nice to see Toranaga still being pretty subtle and clever in his manipulation by exploiting the fact that Buntaro is in love with Mariko. So Buntaro leaves, and Toranaga talks to Mariko, and he's like, "Where does your loyalty lie? You keep saying you serve me, but then you keep prioritizing the barbarian." She says that I've only served you, and then she asks him if he can let her die or kill her because her life is just anguish and suffering. And he gets really pissed off and slaps the knife out of her hands and is like, no. And obviously he's kind of in a mood where he's like, I can't deal with this shit right now. Toranaga is talking to Morishita, his second in command, or why didn't you defend me from that story last night? And he apologizes for not defending him about the shitting in his pants one. And Toranaga's like, no, the one about beheading the general. Like, one swing, how ridiculous. And they're kind of laughing in a dark humor way where Morishita's like you had to hack at him 9 times before his head came off. What a fucking mess you made. And Toranaga's like, only an idiot would make a child his second. Because obviously for that reason that it drew out his own suffering instead of being beheaded smoothly. Saiki shows up to get his decision, and Toranaga says he'll go to Osaka and accept the execution. And Toranaga's brother kind of rubs it in, and he's like, after tomorrow you have nowhere to go and you're nothing. John gets pissed off. He calls out Yabushige and Saganaka, and he talks about Toranaga and is like, the master of trickery. All you've done is trick your own men into a smothering death. So he kind of like lays into him and storms off. But no one really does anything. They just kind of look surprised. So I don't know if this was part of some bigger plan or if at this point Toranaga doesn't care anyway because he's about to die. And you can see he's kind of going off. He's like, "You're all dead," and then he mumbles crimson fucking horse shit as he leaves. So you can just tell all season he's been like, "I want to leave this place. I'm tired of being here." And this episode, he really just feels like completely done with it. So I'm curious to see what happens next episode, if he's actually just going to try to run away or come back or what. We go and Saiki is with Kiku. And he's saying he wants to bring her with him and stuff. And she's like, "Do you want me to do some other stuff to elevate our play?" And she's either part of a plan or has great timing, because this is when Sakanaga shows up and tries to essentially assassinate Saiki. As he tries to kill Saiki out by the bathtubs because he runs away, he slips as he's about to deliver the killing blow, hits his head on a rock, and bleeds out in the hot spring. And Saiki's like, "How is this beautiful?" And this episode really worked hard to make him unlikable when he was already pretty annoying. So when he dies, it's just kind of like, well, that was inevitable. So yeah, that's it for this one. It was a pretty intense episode. I honestly have no clue where the last 3 episodes are going to go. I don't know if Toranaga is going to snap next episode, or if John's going to do something, if there's some bigger plan. It's really hard for me to imagine that he just goes to Osaka peacefully. But I guess we'll see. If you're here, like and subscribe and all that, thanks. See ya.